You know, maybe you don't know, obviously you don't know what I'm about to say. But I know the first line or two of what I'm about to say because I've been holding on to a thought for maybe 5 minutes now. A couple of sentences. And that is, it's a fascinating thing to wander about in a field, wandering about in a field, wondering what it is I'm going to say next. In a field. Here's a physical field, and I am wandering around in a physical field, but what I'm wondering about is not in this physical field. I'm wondering about inside my mind. I'm wondering about in my memories. I'm wondering about in my imagination. I'm wondering about in an intelligence field. I'm navigating about in my intelligence field by feeling. I'm feeling as a compass inside an intelligence field. A field of intelligence, a field of imagination. There's a little place where I discovered lately that when it's windy, I can sit in this little place and the camera can capture my image without the wind blowing so terribly, disturbing the listening of the viewer. Mixing real metaphors here yet again. Words. Fascinating words. Face in 8 things. Face in 8 things. 8 faces. Which face is facing you? Which of my 8 faces, which of any of our 8 faces am I going to present in this pre-recorded video that you are watching after the fact? You're watching it in what I have to call my future, because this is not a live video. I'm the only person present while I'm recording this video, and yet persons, are going to watch this video, presumably, presumably, in what is the future of where I am now, but it's your present. Here's your Christmas present. It's Christmas Day. Today. For one day only in the year, it's the Mass of Christ consciousness embodied socially in society that everybody, nearly, to some extent, celebrates or at least conforms to some degree, la-di-da. Now, You see these few moments of silence? In these few moments of silence, I'm gathering my thoughts. Because literally, I don't know what I'll say next. But let's use the word strategically. I have adapted with my intelligence to know that if I let all my thoughts drop into an abyss of darkness, then there are no little lights like precursors predicting what I think I should say. One thing in particular made very evident in my last couple of videos, but it's inherent in all of them, is that I don't want any prescriptions, limitations, taboos inside myself against what I feel I am allowed to say out loud, and particularly to post the likes of what I'm about to say or have said on the internet, where I have no control over whose eyes will be watching my image or whose ears will be listening and interpreting and having to judge, consciously or unconsciously, what the listener is listening to. And fair play to anyone who is listening to this without judgment, just out of casual interest. But subconsciously, that conscious process will be occurring no matter what it is one is listening to, whether one is conscious of or not. Judgment is to measure the difference on a scale. Some things are true, some things are false, some things are either in between those two or completely outside of anything that you can judge, because there is nothing you can judge it by, because it's completely new thoughts that you may never have heard from anyone else before. So in a field, there's what you know, what you know you know, what you know you've never gone outside of, and what you don't know is what's outside of what you think you already know. You, me, dodgy words. Not dodgy words, but easy to misinterpret, easy to judge. I'm aware that I generally speak about myself when I speak about these concepts, because I like to own that what I'm saying are my own ideas. And I noticed a long time ago that people generally tend to project their own ideas onto others using the word you instead of the word I. And that projection robs a person of their ownership in the seas of what we see outside of ourselves. When we close our eyes, we're not seeing what's outside of ourselves, and yet, if we give ourselves a chance to, once the eyes are closed for a long enough amount of time, we start to see images anyway, even with the eyes closed. So one can see even in the darkness. For most people, the idea of a third eye is the idea that I'm used to seeing with my two eyes, or even with one eye closed, I'm still seeing the outside with a physical eye. But for anyone with more than half a brain, one can see in one's imagination with logic and thought. One can see what one thinks one knows, and beyond that there's another layer. One can see dreams of things which one does not yet know, or one has forgotten. Fascinating. I don't take a lot of effort in presenting how I look to other people. And for that reason, I am often outcast. For one of my favourite ways of looking is casually just looking like an absolute tramp. And I know that even in my own family, not so much my missus and kids, but my external family that I grew up amongst, me looking like a tramp causes them some shame and confusion. Because the rest of my family don't look like tramps. Me looking like a tramp is happen chance. Really, I just don't like earning loads of money in order to buy things. And really, therefore, I don't earn loads of money because I don't like chasing after money. And therefore, I don't have that much spare money to buy new clothes, even from second-hand shops. And second-hand shops, although they may be cheap with quality stuff inside if you're a good bargain hunter, there's a problem there. Is that if you keep on buying new second-hand clothes, you end up with wardrobes full of clothes until the wardrobe's so full, you have to fill the rest of your house with all the things that you can pick up for half nothing in charity shops. See? Now, by that method, I have noticed over the years that going around wearing clothes which are past their wear-by date in society causes one to be judged by society on a pre-conscious level. And among certain people in society, I suppose, on a conscious level. Some people can't help but judge, even though they don't want to. And another set of people can't help but judge, and they want to judge. They just want to hang out with people who are like them. And if they're like them, they like those people. Even if those people are horrible on the inside, so long as the outside suits their conscious purposes, then they think they like those people. For like attracts like. Some intuitively intelligent people will have realised that in those last couple of videos especially, and I've put on the Facebook, which are the two last videos that I recorded, because I'm not really up for editing things. I'm not really up for recording something and then being afraid to show what happened. It's a brave thing to do. And you have to be pretty special kind of stupid to be brave. Strengths are weaknesses and weaknesses of strengths. We're in a polarized world here. To be too intelligent is kind of stupid, and to be stupid is kind of non-intelligent. I mean, But there's a wisdom in being a fool. And this is classic esoteric tarot card symbolism. I like wearing clothes a bit like a tramp because my dad was just a builder, a self-employed builder, farmer, odd job kind of man, cash in hand kind of man. Living from day to day to a fair degree kind of man. As in, to be fair, he made his own luck. And through his luck, he provided quite well for us. But as a wise man, he didn't earn way more than he needed. He didn't have a store of money in a bank. He didn't borrow more money than he could afford to pay back. He'd borrow money to buy cattle, knowing that he'd at least be able to sell the cattle back at a profit. And through experience, he always did. So when he died with no debt. Oh, that's poetic, isn't it? My dad did not leave a debt to society. Or if he did, it was less than $5,000 or whatever it might have been. Canny man that he is, he took out a loan only a few months before he died, even though he didn't know when he was going to die. We all know we'll die sometime, and he lived a good 15 years longer than the doctors advised was likely. And so that debt got cancelled because it's just a credit union loan. Maybe he had insurance for that built into the loan or whatever. I don't know what the crack was, but I do know, as far as I know, that what little debt he had for having bought the calves that he bought in the year before he died, it was debt-free. And he updated his vehicle from the old vehicle to a relatively new vehicle. It was only a couple of years old. And he bought that only a few months before he died. And he did funny tricks for that too. So the guy he bought it from didn't get all the money straight up. But because Dad died, he did get paid. Even though Dad didn't pay him, it was part of the... No, he did get paid. That's what the loan was for. That's right. It was a less than 10 grand loan. Well, these are into minutiae of details of which I'm not even certain. But it's an example of how come I am the way I am is because this is how my dad was. This is what I witnessed of my parents when I was a kid. They were never much for wearing their Sunday best. They didn't really go to Mass. Very many things like that. And I don't really go to Mass. As a kid, I was able to figure out the Catholic Church by the age of 15. Because my parents never made it a thing that I was supposed to believe in. Because they didn't really believe in it. Turns out my dad didn't really believe in it because he'd had bad experience with a priest being a sexual deviant. When my dad was only, what's it called? First Holy Communion? No, confirmation. Around the confirmation age, my dad got to see how sexually dodgy, not true to the word, these priestly people can be. I don't mean to tar them all with the same brush. But it's hard not to notice, acknowledge the percentage of men who wear frocks. You can finish all those sentences for yourself, I suppose. So I've put on this pair of glasses as an example of how different one looks with or without a pair of glasses. Because glasses are symbolic. Generally of someone who's either a craftsman or a literary man who needs to be able to see with fine detail. And my eyesight has gotten less than fine over these last few years. So in order to read things on a computer screen these days, I must wear these glasses. Otherwise, it's almost painful. It's also just not easy to actually read, to focus, to see the black and white. And it's particularly hard to spell when I'm writing, unless I'm wearing the glasses. Now, if I were wearing different clothes, shaved, short hair, very fancy glasses, posh voice, well articulated, loads of pauses, not speaking too swiftly, not swearing all the time, then I would be presenting a different face, and you would be perceiving a different idea about me, about my background. I could pretend to be someone else than who I was as a child, influenced by my parents. One of my brothers married a solicitor. That same brother had much the same childhood as me in terms of we grew up in the same house with the same family. And yet, since a teenager, he always wanted to leave his family behind and present a very different face to the world. He wanted to be an architect. I very recently realised he wanted to be a fucking mason. Architect. He wants to be the eye of the pyramid. I'm projecting this onto him, but he married a solicitor. And as far as I understand, that solicitor will be a member of a fraternity, of a secret society. Might not be called a Freemason society, it might just be called a solicitor society. But she has been inducted. She has received a degree from a university. My brother, I don't think ever got a degree from a university. He failed to get enough points to get his university place to study architecture. So he had to do building construction instead. He had to work his way up to wherever he is these days with his multi-million-pound investments. Investments. It's the same word as the priestly class use. I'm delving very deep into stuff I don't really know much about in the outside world, which is these mental constructions in society which have built society layer by layer over thousands of years. And that's been a curiosity to me for tens of years as to how do structures get built over thousands of years in society. Artificial constructions of mental ideas with an exoteric outside face and an esoteric inside place, a holy of holies. I don't know much about it. I know a lot about synchronicity through my experiences. Synchronicity where two things, many things happen in the same moment, and it coincides with something inside me and triggers some sort of a, what is that about? That's weird. And I've noticed loads of these weird things. And they lodge in my mind till I see another weird thing and another weird thing, and eventually so many of these things lodge until they reach a point where the penny drops, or the snowflakes that lodged in my mind become an avalanche and all start tumbling down and reconfiguring, and suddenly the dust settles and there's a pattern on the floor. God, I'm loving the flow of words using loads of terminology, which I have come to gather over all the years are the kind of terminology which these secret societies use in order to speak in tongues among each other. To say, ah, yes, I learned the same thing which you are showing that you have learned. This is what's called the degrees in a university or in these secret societies. And put it another phrase that comes to my mind, but I would not be allowed to join any of these secret societies because I don't keep these kind of things secret. And I won't bow down to any authority that tells me that I cannot speak openly and speak freely if I feel like it. And I'm not a babbling off my head type of type. But if I feel like saying these things in order to get it off my chest, in order to invoke an echo response, because true invoking echo responses is how I have heard back my own thoughts externalized and then internalized and then externalized and then internalized, which is quite natural, just like the waves and the tides. And in that way I've developed my own sense of intelligence, my own body of thoughts. My own mental body is not taught to me by some pre-existing great work of ages. Let's use another one of their externalized phrases. And why communicate these things? Because I would like to have conversations with people who actually understand what I'm on about, instead of generally not talking to people about the things I understand. Because generally, if I talk about the things I understand to other people who haven't got a clue what the hell I'm on about, such as even the word synchronicity, like a lot of people don't know what that means. And to me, the English language is explicit. It explains its internal dynamics. I've been able to learn what words mean just by thinking about the words, by sounding them, sounding the syllables. There's a lot of words in common usage. I don't read dictionaries for fun, so I don't know what society means by a lot of the highfalutin words. These days, when I'm writing stuff, there's a lot of words I don't know how to spell properly. I can spell them phonetically, but it turns out phonetically spelling words is not the correct spelling in the outside world. And so I have to use a spell checker in a, what's it called? The thing that you write in that isn't Facebook or something that's, called Word, Microsoft Word or whatever else. And it has this little spell checker and it puts little red lines underneath words that are not spelled properly, and then you have to wonder, well, what is the proper spelling then? And therefore I go to a dictionary through the Google search to find out what the correct spelling is, and often I'll actually read, what does this word actually mean according to the outside world, and find out that what it means according to the outside world is not really what it means to me, and try and judge that difference to make sense of why is it different. 2 words I've looked up in the last couple of days. The first one was God, because I've never actually looked up the word God in any kind of a dictionary to find out, according to the outside world, what does it supposedly mean. And if I remember rightly, it means to call. To call or to invoke. God is a fucking verb. a masculine verb. God is a masculine word, and it's a verb. It's an action. It's something we all do. This idea that we are all gods turns out to be true, literally, so long as you dump all the fluff that people think God means. Old man, white beard, sitting on a cloud, never comes down to earth kind of meaning. Couldn't be further from the truth. If God means to invoke, then we are all godlike because we all invoke. We all vocalize. Even if it's... Even babies vocalize before they've learned language. But I'm so curious about how does one learn language? It's like a program that downloads itself from the inside. Language is more intelligent than the people who speak language. And that's my curiosity about the AI as a god, because AI is invoking something out of us. And vocation, fascinating. To invoke, invocation, vocation. Without the in. And this, you know, the word poet never sat easy with me. I didn't think of myself as a poet. I don't like the word poet. It took me a long time until lately to just acknowledge that, yeah, okay, I'm a poet. I just don't really like poems. I didn't really like writing poems. I didn't really like the fact that I kept speaking poetically and sometimes couldn't even stop things from rhyming because it's natural. It flows out from the inside before I can logically stop it, kind of thing. So I shoot my mouth off, sort of thing. I can do. I'm also very good at not doing that. I've learned to keep silent, because not everybody needs to hear. Just because you have ears doesn't mean you have to hear everything, and I recognize that people screen out what they don't comprehend and don't accept. And if you insist on speaking stuff to someone who doesn't accept what you're saying, then you end up in an argument. Which is a word I must look up, because as far as I understand, it's to talk things out. It doesn't have to be angry. You can have an argument and quite enjoy it because it's stimulating. You can have a friendly argument. You can enjoy having an argument with someone who is also enjoying having the argument, because it's helping to educate from the inside out and from the outside in and the inside out, and it's a very intelligent, adaptive, artificial thing to be able to do. Anyway, synchronicities and AI and adaptation and the curious nature of soul drawing out things that are magical ahead of time, bringing things from ahead of time to now. But last night on Christmas Eve, 8 o'clock in the evening, having vowed to kind of stay off Facebook, certainly not to post anything for a week, because for this next week ahead, or if it takes me a week to post this, in the last week that's just been, the sun is unaspected for a week. From round about whenever it is, 23rd, 24th, 25th or something, sometime for about a week, the sun is doing something very unusual in being unaspected. It means none of the other planets are making a angle with it, an aspect. The sun is king of its own world, and no one else has a say over what the sun is doing. No one else can hold it back. No one else can push it forward. No one else can even see what the sun is doing directly. It's unaspected. And for that reason, also for the nature of how the 3 days running up to the winter solstice standstill were pushing, and then dropped. And the moon was void, the sun was apparently standing still. Jupiter was right at the very end of the zodiac, at the very last degree of Pisces. And then became 0 degrees of Aries, the whole beginning from the beginning again. I have a phrase for that from my computer science days a decade ago, which is drop the data set. To let the mind empty so that one can feel in the darkness with no light specifying one thought more important than any other. Turns out that's the great way of speaking in tongues. To have an empty mind and yet words are coming out of the mouth but not filtered and edited. So this example here is that yesterday evening at 8 o'clock, I did have a little look on Facebook, and I only got to see the first post because the first post was this ad, this sponsored, suggested thing from the AI Facebook thing, and it's for The Chosen, apparently series 3 of something called The Chosen, which is about the Jesus story being retold. So I thought, fuck it, this came up a year ago and I didn't bother watching it, but now it's some sort of a free thing and I only have to go to a website, angel.com, and there it is. You can watch this thing that some other people made about one of my favourite subjects. What's the actual way to interpret the Jesus story? Watching it last night, it dawned on me that certainly the way this film is portraying the Jesus story, it's portraying it in the way I imagine the Freemasons present this story. It was all about Jesus is there and he's like, makes no sense, really. It's not so much about Jesus, this story. It's actually about the apostles. I guess that's why it's called The Chosen, because it's saying Jesus chose these guys and none of these guys understood why Jesus chose them. None of these guys knew each other. None of these guys got on with each other. And none of these guys understood a fucking word of what he was saying. And it all just reminded me of the higher echelons of what we're told is 33 degrees. What I imagine these 33 degrees higher understanding people are trying to induct people who understand nothing to begin to understand esoterically. And the second episode, which is as far as I got, but that second episode was about an architect back in the day. His name is Nathaniel. He becomes very famous in the Jesus story, I gather. But he was an architect and a Jew. And he got a job with the Romans. And normally the Romans wouldn't hire a Jew for one of those higher echelon jobs. You see? It's like a native Irish person being hired by an English guy to actually be part of the English system and speaking in the English language and all that stuff. But he was picked up as a 7-year-old because he was really good at maths. And even though he was Jewish, he was so good at maths that they put him into a Roman school and gave loads of money to his dad to educate him. And in his 20s or 30s or whatever it was, he'd gotten his job to actually design what was his dream, which was to build a temple that would really actually raise the consciousness of the people in the temple to bring them closer to God, which I now understand from yesterday, in the few hours before having watched this, that God actually means to invoke. So a building that could invoke in people the ability to feel able to speak in tongues, feel like they could speak in tongues, and resonate with the building, and the building would actually help the individual body to resonate a higher frequency by being in an environment that resonated a higher frequency than the minds of most people's bodies. Wow. Anyway, this poor chap was having difficult. The Romans were making it difficult for him to really succeed because of the racism against the Jews, is how it's presented. And so the building collapsed. Somebody nearly died because he got collapsed on. And this all made me think this is a Freemasonic story. And any of you who've been listening to me for a while know that I'm very curious about who wrote the story. And if Jesus was such a wise man, how come he didn't write it himself? And these subjects are actually dealt with in this The Chosen documentary film thing. Now, it's a film, it's not a documentary, but however, it is about documenting the story, so it is a documentary. Where Jesus ends up in the dock, and this is the bit we're all interested in, or at least me. Why did Jesus end up in the dock, and why did Jesus end up on the cross, and why did Jesus ended up put in a position where he was able to apparently transcend death? And it's Christmas Day, and I've got no qualms about posting this particular video, because I'm not really annoying people's heads with stuff they don't want to think about. Because on this day in particular, if you're not thinking about why are we celebrating Christmas just after winter solstice, if you're not thinking about that, I don't mind disturbing you, because these thoughts won't disturb you. You'll have scrolled on by long 40 minutes ago. Do you know what I mean? Dun, 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 dun. But if you're still listening to this, you must be interested in the story, so I'm not annoying your head. It's voluntary to listen to this. It's random to be listening to this. It's a choice to still be listening to this. Nathaniel. At the end of it, Jesus blows the guy's mind by knowing stuff that he couldn't know about this guy's life. Knowing specific details about this guy's breakdown in his life. This guy's personal prayer to God that he said out loud in a place where there was no one else, sitting under a fig tree in the countryside. And in the film, the guy takes out the architectural drawings that he'd made for this temple that collapsed. And he's calling out to God, and he burns the architectural drawing until it's a big pile of ash on the floor, on the ground. And he does this weird thing. After he's cried out and he doesn't get an answer from God, he picks up the ashes and puts them on his head. So he's burned down his previous life up to that point, and from the ashes, he sprinkles the ashes on his head, and then he gets up and walks away. So he's risen from the ashes of his previous life like a phoenix. Self-initiated. And his self-initiation, combined with the luck that his friend, Philip, and Philip had been with John the Baptist, or in this they call it John the Geek, which is brave. John the Weirdo. His friend Philip has been out in the wilderness with John for a couple of years, and John says, go to this guy Jesus and become his follower. And this guy Philip goes to Jesus, and Jesus is going to the same town where this guy Nathaniel lives, and Philip asks him, hey, can I pop in and see my friend Nathaniel? And Jesus goes, yeah, take your time, there's no hurry. And Philip goes to see Nathaniel, and Nathaniel is in a mess in himself. He's drinking to try and drown his sorrows, having failed to contact God inside in himself. He's down on himself. Philip turns up at his house, climbs in through the window because the door is closed, wakes up Neanderthal Nathaniel from his slumber, talks him around and says, you got to come meet this guy Jesus, he's different. He's the one that the Jewish tradition has been prophesying for 400 years, according to the scriptures, according to the film. Anyway, at the end of this second episode of The Chosen, Nathaniel does come with Philip to meet Jesus, and Jesus does go, I already know you, even though we've never met in the physical. Blows his brain away that Jesus knows about him making his prayer and making his sacrifice, burning his architectural drawings, putting the ash on his head, rising from the ashes and carrying his invisible cross, his crux of his matter, his failure to accomplish his own will, the not my will but thy will be done, in this telling of the story is about the apostles going through what Jesus is going to go through. Fascinating. Fascinating. My battery's going to run up before too long. There's a little low battery notification just came up. And Jesus starts singing Nathanael's praises to Nathanael and telling him essentially that Nathanael is the reincarnation of Jacob, and that Nathanael is going to re-experience in this life what he had already experienced in the Jacob lifetime, which is, dun 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 dun, Jacob's ladder, which is a reference to psychotic insight. Psychotic insight of a vision, of seeing the angels travelling up and down this pillar of light from heaven to earth, up and forth, what Snakes and Ladders children's game symbolises. And Nathanael doesn't understand what the hell Jesus is on about. And Jesus says, look, you're going to see man going up and down this ladder. You're going to see the next 2,000 years, and it's going to take thousands of years. And it's put in that words. And Jesus is speaking to Simon, who ends up being Peter, Saint Peter, who becomes the foundational rock of what becomes the Catholic Church a few hundred years later, after Peter and Jesus have died. Now, my curiosity in all this is, how the fuck am I able to interpret all of this when I still haven't read the Bible and I still haven't even read the New Testament? Like, for me, it's boring trying to read that stuff, because to me it's badly written, although I recognize that it is written in a way that is bad so that people who are bad can read it. Which is to say, it's a skeleton of a story, but you have to feel the resonance inside in yourself to be able to interpret that story, no matter how many times you read it. The difference between having knowledge from the outside that's taught to you by so-called elders or scribes or Pharisees or prophets. Doesn't matter how many times you read that stuff with your mind, if you don't have the resonance in your heart, then the veils don't fall from your eyes and you have no way of interpreting it in truth. You've no way of feeling whether your interpretation is the truth or if it's red herrings in Jesus's fishnets. And I don't buy into any of this story about whether Jesus was alive or not alive, whether it was his real name or not, whether it's a made-up story or not, whether the guy actually lived or not, whether it's badly translated or not. I don't know any of that external thing. All I know is in my heart, I can project onto that story to make sense of my weird life. Whether I like it or not, I absorbed that story because my parents did bring me to Catholic masses when I was less than 7 years old. And I stayed going with my parents until I was 15 years old. And at 15 years old, that brother who's now possibly a Mason, certainly is married to a solicitor and certainly is a horrible bastard, in my view. Pity, but in my view, true. He was 18 when I was 15. And my parents had this thing of, when you're 18, you can make your own decisions, but until then, while you're living under our roofs, you follow our guidance. You do what we say. So we went to Mass. My brother stopped going to Mass when he was 18, which is the same time that I was 15. And I stood up to my parents and everyone else and said, I'm not going to Mass anymore either. There's no point, like, I'm not listening. I want to hold my hand up and question them. I don't want to sit there, kneel, sit, stand, repeat after me stuff. I don't want to do any of that. So I stopped going to Mass, and my parents went one more time without me or my brother Paul, And that was the last time they went to Mass either, because there was this ridiculous, in their words, there was this ridiculous sermon from the priest interpreting the scriptures. And the scriptures, Catholic as it was in Ireland, said that during the crucifixion time, at Easter time, around the crucifixion thing, there is a parable that says that there was a chicken who was being boiled in a soup, and the women were all talking around the fireplace where the chicken was in the pot being boiled, already dead, and there was talk about whether Jesus had resurrected or not, and was eternal life, whether he'd proved his preaching. And one of the women said, there's more chance of this chicken jumping out of the pot and walking away from here. There's more chance of that happening than Jesus resurrecting from the dead. He's not the real Messiah. We have to wait for hundreds more years. We do have faith that the concept is true, but we don't believe he's the guy who's fulfilled the contract. The covenant. Covenant. Not a good word to look up. Anyway, for my parents, that was too much to say that a chicken had jumped up out of a pot to prove that Jesus was true. Yeah? So they stopped going to Mass as well. So my story around this religious stuff is kind of funny. I'm way outside the loop. But inherently, I do know what those stories are about in my own way, from my own memories, which I have to, as a teenager, go, well, there must be something to this past life and astrology and all that stuff, because otherwise I have no explanation for how come I'm a font of speaking in tongues even as a teenager. So there you go. That's one man's story. My little story, my mystery about myself that I'm trying to figure out, and in trying to find out my mystery and my internal experiences, I've ended up having to find out, well, what does the outside world say about these things that I'm internally experiencing? These things I've inherited by finding myself inside a physical body, and then in my physical body there's what science calls some DNA, and inside DNA there's epigenetics, and in epigenetics there's some sort of a link to soul intelligence, and that's some sort of a link to reincarnation. Reincarnation just being the word incarnation, which just means to be intelligence inside of flesh. The other thing I'm going to leave you with, because the battery's going to run out, is the word psyche. And psyche means bridge between mind and soul. The other word is psychosis. And it turns out from looking yesterday that osis is a medical term which just means condition, like a medical condition. So psychosis is a condition of the mind, soul, psyche. And medically it means someone who is imagining things in their own way, in a way that is so different from the way that other people imagine things, society. To be imagining your own thing so different from the rest of society that you're not following along with the things that the rest of society follow along, that means you have psychosis. You are psychotic. Which is, again, back to one of my favourite themes that I have to try and understand, is how come so many people I know have been arrested and diagnosed with psychosis, which is incurable. Unless it heals itself, there's no curing for it. So these mental hospitals are not a place to cure psychosis, they're a place to detain people who cannot contain their psychosis, who don't want to think like everyone else, or who just can't be indoctrinated to be made in the image of man, modern man, social man. So here's something to look into for yourself, in yourself, but in the outside world you can just go on the fucking internet or pick up a book and look up the definition of God and surprise yourself to find it just means to invoke. and psychosis, which just means to say words in ways that are different to how people usually speak. It's to stand out from the crowd. So Jesus was psychotic by definition. Jesus's whole teachings were a psychosis, and John the Baptist's whole teachings were a psychosis, and they both spread that psychosis to their followers, to their disciples, who learned to discipline themselves, that even though they didn't understand what the psychosis was, they had some bit of the psychosis, which is why their guru chose them, in order to educate them in psychosis, to draw the psychosis out, to draw out what is within. Look up the word education. Now, you have to look up in etymology, not just the modern, what it's supposed to mean. You got to look up the word etymologically. Not just a dictionary, but an etymology dictionary, where the words originally came from in Latin or Greek or whatever pan-European pre-English languages. Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas. And last thing to say about Christmas, the thing about Christmas is that 3 days after the winter solstice is when the light begins to noticeably, visibly, days start to get longer again. So Christmas is celebrating that the days are getting longer again. And that's the correlation between Christ light and sunlight. And the darkest hour is the hour before dawn. And all that kind of stuff. It's also the coldest hour. And think about resonance. If this resonates with you, then it's the word of God, which is, say, the words I'm invoking, are invoking something in you which resonates, which may contradict what you've been told to believe that the words mean, or the religion means, or you mean, or life means. There's also somebody, that's lovely man Armin, sent me a video today that was only recorded yesterday. It's one of these chats between a truther and a guy who's transcended the truthers, who just doesn't believe in the truther movement because it's stupid. Movement. Truth doesn't move, kind of thing. Truth resides in stillness. Truth is within. Outside is factual, but that's partial. Partial knowledge resonates partially. Whole truth is beyond anything that the partial understands. Discombobulating. Drop the data set. All those things. Shall I speak for another minute and a half, and then it'll be exactly an hour-long video? So fascinating. I am showing a face here, publicly, which normally one can't show for fear of being accused of having psychosis for speaking words in a way that are not generally accepted, changing the generalized meaning of the terms, therefore terminating one's part in society, one's partial place in society. And it's just a different interpretation of all of this Jesus story in respect to Christmas. 2,000 years later, when so many people think that these are the days of Revelation, when people think this is the apocalypse, when people think we're on the cutting edge of something, and where I personally think that time is escalating because something's happening in the magnetic field of the Mother Earth. And the Mother is magnetic, and magnetic holds the whole field which particles of factual intellect are exploring. Bye. 59:59. 10,000. Bye-bye. Thanks for watching, man. You must be really into this kind of knowledge if you've watched all of this. Thanks.